3:15 in the afternoon. Seattle was drizzling. David turned off the car just before the porch, letting the engine fade into the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood. The business trip had ended a day early, and on his way home, he picked up a bouquet of white tulips, the kind his mother loved, and a blueberry muffin for his wife, Emily. Today will be a sweet surprise, he thought, smiling as he turned the key in the lock. The door opened. The faint aroma of chicken soup drifted from the kitchen, blending with the warm scent of old wood, the kind that had absorbed decades of memories. David set the flowers on the console table and bent down to take off his shoes. Then he heard voices. Emily's tone was low, sharp. "I told you, Mom. Please don't stack the dishes like that. I just cleaned them. You're only making things harder." Silence followed. One of those silences that presses down on the chest. His mother's voice, Helen's, was soft as chalk dust. "I only wanted to help. Being home all day makes me afraid I'll become a burden." David froze, still holding his shoes. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words slipped through like cold raindrops down the back of his neck. Emily spoke again, faster now. "Being a burden or not is a choice, Mom. I've already organized everything. You just need to not touch my system." That word, system, came out with a mix of pride and defense. The new order Emily had built in the kitchen, the living room, the cleaning schedule pinned to the fridge with heart-shaped magnets. "I'm sorry," Helen said, her apology sounding like an old habit, like how the elderly apologize for walking too slowly or dropping a glass. David took a deep breath, the smell of rain and soup blending together, then stepped into the kitchen with a smile stretched tight across his face. "Surprise!" he said, holding out the flowers. Emily's smile arrived half a second late. Her eyes flicked from the bouquet to a splash of water near the sink. "You're home early?" she asked, her tone just slightly raised, half question, half test. "Yeah," he said. Tutored neighborhood kids in algebra for free. How they'd wrapped his small fingers in wool mittens during cold winters. Since the wedding, those hands had barely touched a cooking spoon. "I have a Zoom meeting at 4, Emily said, eyes still on her laptop. "I'm setting up the lights and camera in the living room. Mom, please don't turn on the TV. The sound echoes into the mic." Helen nodded and took another small step back. Every instruction pushed her a little farther toward the edge of the room until her back brushed the wooden chair. David heard the rain grow heavier outside. He adjusted his collar and said softly, "How about dinner together tonight? Mom, you can tell me about the roses in the garden. I saw them blooming beautifully." Helen's smile brightened, a little lamp turning on inside her chest. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. But early, please, before 6. I have a live stream at 8. Dinner drifted like a small boat through shallow water, stopping often, moving only in spurts. Helen talked about a squirrel that had bitten her rosebuds. Emily talked about new clients, KPIs, time management in modern marriage. David watched, listening not just to words but to gestures. The way Emily passed the salt without meeting Helen's eyes. The way his mother served rice but pulled her hand back quickly when the ladle clinked against the pot, as if she'd done something wrong. Dinner ended precisely when the clock struck 6. Later that night, David stood under the porch. The rain had stopped, but the roof still dripped. He thought about Emily's phrase, "my system." She was brilliant at work, disciplined, efficient, structured. But at home, that system had become an invisible fence, gently but firmly pushing the elderly out of every small act of belonging, like washing a dish or placing a spoon, And David realized he was part of that system too, through his silence. The next morning, he brewed tea for his mother. The scent of Earl Grey filled the kitchen. It smelled like childhood, like books and sunlight. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. Helen nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again, unsure. "I'm afraid of being in the way," she said softly. "I don't want to upset Emily." "Book anyway." She walked away slowly but firmly, her soft slippers whispering like drizzle. David watched her go, a dull ache in his chest. Then he turned to Emily. "Maybe she could sit quietly in the corner," he said. "She just wants to hear human voices." "Human voices are background noise on the recording," Emily replied, calm and logical. "You know that affects the audio quality. I don't want our partners thinking we live in chaos." David's voice lowered. "A house isn't chaotic just because there's one more person in it." They stood across the table from each other, the vase of tulips between them. One petal fell, thin as a sigh. At noon, while Emily stepped out to pick up a package, David passed the reading room. He heard a voice, his mother's voice, softly reading aloud, pausing, rereading, like performing for someone unseen. The door was slightly open. He peeked in. Helen was reading To Kill a Mockingbird, lips moving, finger tracing lines. She was reading to the room itself, to fill the silence. David stepped in quietly and sat on the rug. "Keep reading, Mum," he said. She startled, then smiled, the wrinkles at her eyes folding like blossoms. Later that afternoon, something small happened, so small it could have been missed, like a drop spilling from a full glass, yet big enough to ripple through the day. Emily spilled cocoa powder on the counter. Brown dust scattered across the wood. Helen jumped up, reflexively, grabbing a towel. She brushed, gently, trying to help. "I'll handle it," Emily said, quickly, sharply. "You'll rub it into the grain. This is walnut wood. You wouldn't know." Helen froze, towel in hand like a white flag. She began, but Emily had already taken the towel. "Please, Mum, just rest. I told you." David stood still, the sound of that towel being pulled echoing louder in his ears than it should have. No shouting, no violence, yet something had been cut. A thin, invisible thread between the two women. He placed his hand lightly on Emily's arm. "You could have said, 'Thanks, Mum. I'll finish it.' Just one extra sentence." Emily sighed. "You want me to pretend?" She doesn't understand. Came downstairs, hair still marked by the pillow. David said gently, "Let's have breakfast together. Then, let's set a new rule. Not a system, but a rule for 3 adults sharing one home. Respect, listening, and giving everyone something to do. If Mom wants to wash dishes, she can. If you need quiet, I'll soundproof your workspace. And me, I won't stay silent anymore." Emily stared, surprised. Her eyes drifted to the table, the bowl of oatmeal, the coffee, the spoon placed exactly as she liked. Then, her gaze softened as she caught her reflection in the oven glass. A tired woman who had been holding too much for too long. "I never meant to hurt your mom," she said quietly. "I just didn't want everything to fall apart. I didn't want people to think I'm a bad daughter-in-law." "A little mess is still life," David said, smiling. "And no one gets to grade you, except us, in our own home." Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Helen appeared, holding the railing. "Mom," David called, "come eat breakfast with us." She looked at the two of them, her grown-up children, and something in her face eased, as if a picture frame had finally been set straight. That morning, there were no unnecessary apologies, no cold instructions, just the sound of spoons clinking, of hesitant laughter turning warm. David told a story about a squirrel stealing a tulip petal. Emily laughed, her first real laugh in days, and shared how the muffin's edge had burned but still tasted good. Helen spoke little, but every word she said felt like placing a gentle offering in the center of the table. As breakfast ended, David glanced at the camera on the shelf. The dark lens that had recorded hours of live streams, deals and deadlines. Life would go on. There would still be schedules, goals and systems. But from now on, within those lines of order, they would grow something curved and human. A corner for his mother to wash dishes slowly. An hour for Emily to pause and listen. And a promise to himself, never again to stay silent about the small things that hurt the ones he loves. If somewhere in this story you see your own family, a harsh word, an unintentional gesture, an elder quietly stepping back from the kitchen. After that breakfast, David's house didn't look any different to the outside world. It was still the same quiet 2-story home with a white fence and tulips blooming by the porch. But inside, something had shifted. Not through grand gestures, but through silences that felt lighter than before. Helen wore her old daisy-patterned apron, the one she used to keep hidden in the drawer because it didn't match Emily's modern style. This morning, she put it on and stepped into the kitchen. When Emily came downstairs, instead of saying, "Let me handle it, Mum," she said softly, "Mum, let me show you where the spices are." Her voice had dropped half a tone, and from the breakfast table, David could hear how the air in the house had softened. Sometimes, the best beginnings start with a sentence that small. That afternoon, Emily went out to meet a client. David worked from home, and his mother decided to make her old-fashioned chicken soup, with carrots, onions, celery, and a touch of ginger. The same smell he remembered as a sick child lying on the couch. The kitchen filled with the scent of ginger and broth, the scent of memory. Helen fumbled a little with the electric stove, the one Emily had once told her not to touch. David smiled, standing beside her. "Here, let me show you, Mom. Hold this button for 2 seconds before it turns on." Helen laughed gently. "In my day, all we needed was a match and a spark." "In our day," David replied, "you need 1 click and 10 pages of instructions." They both laughed. When the soup was ready, he tasted it. The warmth of ginger spread down his throat. "Smells just like the day I took my college entrance exam," he said. Helen spooned him another serving. "A mother's soup always smells the same," she whispered. "Only the child eating it grows up." It was the first lunch in months they'd shared without the TV, without pretending to be busy. Only the sound of spoons touching porcelain and the slow afternoon light through the window. When Emily came home, she paused at the door. On the table were 2 bowls of soup and a small embroidered handkerchief with the letter E. Helen had found it. Fragile peace was tested. David was at work. Emily was live streaming. Helen was out trimming flowers in the garden. A sudden gust of wind blew open the back door and toppled Emily's photo backdrop. It crashed into a bucket of water, short-circuiting her expensive ring light. When Emily saw it, she panicked. "Mum, I told you not to open the door while I'm filming," she shouted, her voice rising before she could stop it. Helen froze. She remembered closing the door, just not locking the latch. "The wind was strong, I thought." "It's not your fault," David said as he stepped in. But Emily's voice broke. "You don't understand. That light was custom-made. They don't make it anymore. I can't shoot without it." The room shrank with tension. Helen stepped back, trembling, her eyes wide and hurt like a child who'd broken something precious. David looked at his wife and saw her fear, the pressure of her work, the exhaustion behind her anger. Then he looked at his mother and saw the wound of old shame reopening. He spoke softly. "Emily, things can be replaced, but if Mom feels blamed, the real thing broken today isn't the lamp, it's someone's heart." Emily fell silent. Helen started to speak, but David took her hand. "It's okay, Mom," he said gently. "I'll buy a new one for her. I've got it covered." Those 3 words, "it's okay," made her lips tighten and her eyes glisten. It had been a long time since she'd heard them, not as forgiveness, but as comfort. That evening, while David went for a walk, Emily sat beside her mother-in-law. "Mom, I'm sorry I raised my voice earlier," she said. Helen shook her head. "I understand. Everyone gets tired. I'm old. I forget things. I make mistakes." "No, please don't say that," Emily said quickly. "I'm just afraid of failing. At work, I have to control everything. If things get messy, people think I'm weak. But at home, I forgot. This isn't a company." Helen smiled. "Home is where you don't have to be strong all the time." They sat quietly for a moment. Emily asked, "Do you resent me, Mom?" Helen shook her head. "No. I just feel sad when you seem so tired. Young people think we don't understand, but we've lived those fears too, just slower." Emily's tears fell, not from guilt, but from being understood. For the first time, she reached for Helen's hand, dry, warm, trembling slightly. No promises, no apologies, just honesty. And in that simple touch, the distance between them began to heal. A week later, David organized a small family dinner. He cooked steak, Emily made salad, and Helen baked an apple pie. As the smell of apples and cinnamon filled the house, David said, "I think our home needs a new habit. 1 meal a week, no phones, no talk about work, just food and old stories." Helen smiled, "Like when you were little." Emily nodded. "I like that. I've got plenty of old stories. Just no one's asked to hear them." "Mom and I both want to," David said, looking at the 2 women, one carrying his past, the other sharing his future, both learning in their own ways how to love again. Months passed. Spring arrived, carried by birdsong and the smell of wildflowers. One morning, Helen slipped in the garden. It wasn't serious, just a fall, but it frightened Emily. She rushed her to the hospital and held her hand the entire time. "I'm sorry," she told David. "I should have gone out with her earlier." The doctor said it was only a sprain. When they left, Helen squeezed Emily's hand. "I'm fine," she said. "But thank you for caring." That night, Emily brought ginger tea to Helen's room. She placed it on the table without saying a word. Just a gesture. But Helen understood. Love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it only needs someone to stay. Another evening, Emily went live on her channel talking about gratitude in the modern family. Helen sat in the living room, listening. Emily's voice was calm and clear. "We chase productivity so hard that we forget home isn't a place to manage. It's a place where we can be soft." "Why so many colors?" Emily asked. "Because each one reminds me of someone. And the white ones? The white ones are you." "Me? Why?" "Because I believe you're a new beginning," Helen said with a gentle smile. "Like morning light, pure and full of hope." That evening, David wrote in his journal, "I used to think peace in a family meant never arguing. But after 40, I've learned that real peace is when people dare to speak, dare to be wrong, and dare to make it right. No one is perfect, only those who listen in time." He closed his notebook and heard laughter from the porch. His mother and his wife were talking about what dessert to make for Easter. A sparrow darted past the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, scattering golden specks on the wall, like broken pieces of memory mended by love. And as the narrator's warm voice faded in the final scene, this could be David's story, or Helen's, or Emily's, but really, it's the story of many homes. Homes where misunderstandings aren't born from cruelty, but from the fear of not being seen. Homes with mothers who don't want to be burdens, and daughters-in-law afraid of being judged. And if there's one lesson worth learning, it's this. Love doesn't grow from being right or wrong. It grows from stopping long enough to listen. Then the voice softens, closing with emotion. If you're living with your mother-in-law or daughter-in-law and feel that the distance between you has grown too wide, remember, sometimes a simple good morning, a cup of tea, or a gentle, "I'm sorry, Mum," is enough to begin again. No one truly wants to hurt another. We just sometimes forget how to love. And if you'd like to hear more heartfelt stories like this, stories that remind us every crack can be healed with kindness, subscribe to New Golden Day. There, every day, we learn together to live slower, love deeper, and listen with our hearts. Morning sunlight spilled over the tulip beds like drops of honey. Helen opened the window and took a long breath, letting the scent of damp grass and spring air fill her lungs. From the porch came the chirping of birds, a wordless symphony announcing the day's beginning. She always woke earlier than the other two, not because of insomnia, but because age teaches you how precious morning light can be. She liked watching the house before anyone spoke, when silence was still gentle, when the world still felt soft, like a dream not yet broken. On the kitchen counter lay a small card Emily had left the night before, written in fountain pen, slightly shaky but clear. "Thank you, Mom, for always being patient with me. I'm slowly learning how to be a better daughter." Helen held the card, her fingertips brushing over the words, and smiled. A slow, grateful smile. She had taught hundreds of children in her life, faces, voices, personalities blending into years of memory, but the student she remembered most was her daughter-in-law. Not because Emily was brilliant, but because she was learning through fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. And Helen realized, the young today carry a heavier burden than her generation ever did. They don't battle poverty, they battle perfection. She sat down and poured herself a cup of Earl Grey. The smell reminded her of her husband. He had been gone 10 years now, taken by a sudden stroke. At that time, David was just starting his career, and Emily had only recently entered his life. Like a bright wind through the door, Helen still remembered her husband's last words. "When it's just you and him, let the boy choose his own life." She had kept that promise. She never interfered in their marriage, never commented when she saw their differences, never reacted when Emily's tone turned cold. She told herself, everyone has a reason. Love doesn't always mean speaking up. Sometimes it's knowing when to stay quiet. But years later, she learned another truth. Silence, kept too long, becomes its own mistake. At first, she thought she was keeping peace. But silence made people think she didn't feel, didn't know mother-in-law. But that day she'd learned, in some conflicts, nobody needs to win. Someone just needs to understand. Now, looking at Emily, she saw her younger self. Life, she thought, moves in circles. Those who once endured will someday be the ones who must endure again. Those who once learned will become the teachers. Life is a classroom that never ends. Only the faces change, growing older, hopefully gentler. Footsteps came from the stairs. Emily appeared, hair damp, wearing a beige sweater. "You're up early, Mom," she said, her tone softer than before. "I'm used to it. Older folks don't sleep much." Emily poured a glass of water and sat down. "You know," she said, "yesterday I finished filming my video. Someone commented that it made them miss their mother. She passed away. I cried reading it." Helen smiled. "That's why you chose that topic, isn't it?" "Yes. I guess I hoped if I shared something real, people would feel it." "You're right," Helen said gently. "People don't want lessons. They want to feel a heart." Emily went quiet. She looked at her mother-in-law's hands, thin, spotted with age, and suddenly she understood. Love doesn't always speak. It brews tea without being asked. It serves soup, salty or bland, without complaint. It waits at the door when you're late, without saying a word. Helen stood up and walked to the garden. Emily followed. Together, they knelt beside the tulips. "These ones are fading," Emily said. "Yes," Helen nodded, "but they fade so new ones can bloom." "Nothing lasts forever, not even flowers. Doesn't that make you sad?" "No," Helen smiled. "The saddest thing isn't what we lose. It's when we stop seeing the beauty of what comes next." Emily said nothing. In the breeze, Helen's silver hair glowed softly in the sunlight, as if time had taken nothing from her but left peace in its place. David came out, coffee in hand. "You two keep talking like this and you'll turn into philosophers." Helen laughed. "Son, live long enough and everyone becomes a philosopher." The three of them sat on the porch under the gentle sun. David talked about work, Emily about her new video, and Helen about old neighbours. Laughter drifted through the morning air. To anyone passing by, it was just another ordinary day. But to them, it was a miracle. Because once, silence had been the border between them. Helen remembered the day months ago when David came home early and witnessed Emily's outburst. She hadn't been angry, only sad. Sad for both of them, because both women wanted the same thing: love. They just expressed it differently. She wanted respect. Emily wanted to feel worthy. Now, as calm returned, Helen understood. People don't change overnight. They grow slowly, through the small scars they survive. And every time someone learns to say, "I'm sorry," their heart grows a little wiser. That afternoon, she opened her old notebook and wrote, "Some relationships don't need someone to be right. They just need someone willing to take one step back. Because that step isn't defeat. It's the space where two people can meet again." She closed the book and went to make tea. Emily came down with a box of butter cookies. "I tried a new recipe," she said. Helen tasted one and smiled. Perfect. Just the right sweetness. Emily laughed. "I remember. You like things just right." Helen nodded. "Yes. Because in life, anything too much doesn't last. Even love. Only what's just enough stays." Emily looked down, her eyes glistening. "Mom, I know I wasn't easy in the beginning. I was afraid people would think I wasn't a good wife or daughter-in-law. I was afraid of being compared. But I never realized how much you endured." Helen placed her hand over Emily's, light as a memory. "I didn't endure," Fotel and murmured. "See? They finally understand each other." and inside her chest was something light, the kind of peace the old speak of, not because life was perfect, but because love had found its way back, quietly and surely. She stepped out onto the porch. The tulips had withered, just as she'd said they would. But beneath them, new buds were pushing through, small but strong. Helen touched one gently, feeling life pulse beneath her fingertips, and whispered, "Thank you for letting me stay long enough to see this." The narrator's voice softened, like a breath at dusk. Some family stories seem small, yet they carry whole lives within them. When we're young, we long to be understood. When we're old, we just hope not to be forgotten. Between generations, sometimes all it takes is a hug, a look, to heal the unseen cracks. If you have a mother, a daughter-in-law, or simply someone you love but haven't thanked yet, do it today, because tomorrow we might only have their words in an old journal and tulips blooming late in spring. If this story warmed your heart, share it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe to New Golden Day, where every day we rediscover the quiet beauty of kindness and learn to slow down, so we can love a little more. The afternoon light was soft and golden. Emily sat alone in her home office, the same room that had once been a battlefield of tension, filled with raised voices over deadlines, failed live streams, and the echoes of frustration when someone accidentally opened the door mid-broadcast. The room hadn't changed, but something within it had. On the desk, instead of a laptop, lay a brown leather notebook, a fountain pen, and a cup of tea her mother-in-law had prepared. Emily sat quietly for a long time. No music, no phone, just stillness. Then, she opened the notebook and began to write. "Dear Mom Helen, I'm not sure if you'll ever read this. Maybe I'll just write it and keep it to myself. A way to say the words I never had the courage to speak aloud. I want to say, I'm sorry." She paused. The ink glistened wet on the page, catching the slanting light. Emily took a deep breath and continued. "The first day I stepped into this house, I thought I would do well. I wanted to be loved, to be respected, to be called a good daughter-in-law. I did everything the way I thought was right, organizing, managing, planning, controlling, as if the house were one of my projects. But I didn't realize that in trying to take charge, I was slowly pushing out the person who had built this home with her own hands." Emily looked up through the window. Outside, Helen sat on the porch, wearing her thin wool hat, gently trimming the dried tulips. The sunlight slid across her silver hair, soft as mist. Emily's handwriting trembled as she wrote on. "Mom, I used to think your silence meant you disliked me. I thought your quiet eyes were filled with disappointment. But now I understand. You were just giving me space to grow up in my own way. It took me far too long to realize. Your gentleness wasn't weakness. It was the strength of someone who had already lived through life's storms." She set the pen down, her heart swelling with something that wasn't guilt, but tenderness. A late tenderness, yet genuine. "There was one afternoon, I remember, I accidentally broke your flower vase, and instead of apologizing, I snapped, 'Why would you put it there?' Now I feel ashamed. The vase wasn't important, but the way I spoke made you apologize for something that wasn't your fault." "Okay, Emily." Those 3 words stayed with me for months. It's okay. Simple as air, but it made me cry. Because in those words I heard forgiveness and sorrow. Emily wiped her tears and glanced toward the porch. Helen had gone inside, probably to make tea. The sunlight flooded the room, and for the first time Emily felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer afraid. "Mom, I used to think I had to be better than someone to deserve love. But you taught me that kindness alone makes us worthy of it. I used to think love meant grand gestures, but you showed me it's the quiet things. Brewing tea for someone, saving the best part of a meal, waiting by the door without complaint. If you hadn't stayed, I might never have learned that." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her words now flowed softer, lighter. She thought of her hardest days, the pressure from work, the endless comparisons to other perfect wives, the exhaustion of trying to be everything at once, and how, in that effort, she'd forgotten the woman living under the same roof who had once faced the same struggles. I know you were lonely in your own home. Those afternoons I spent adjusting the lights for my live streams, you sat alone with your book. I remember hearing you cough lightly behind the door, and I didn't open it. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid to lose focus, afraid to fall behind. It's ironic, isn't it? I spent years trying to reach strangers, but I couldn't hear the one person right beside me. Emily smiled sadly. The sunlight tilted across the floor. Outside, tulip petals drifted in the breeze. Her heart felt calm. Thank you for not leaving when I didn't yet understand. Thank you for making tea every morning, even when you knew I wouldn't drink it. Thank you for showing me that kindness doesn't need words, only patience. And thank you for teaching me something no school ever could. That love doesn't mean agreeing on everything. It means waiting long enough for someone to change. Her handwriting trembled. She had never written a letter like this. Every sentence felt like an apology. Every word an embrace. She stepped out of the room, notebook in hand. Helen was in the living room, reading, her eyes narrowing against the dim light. "Mom," Emily said softly. Helen looked up, smiling. "Yes, dear?" "I have something for you." She placed the notebook gently in her mother-in-law's hands. Helen looked at the cover, didn't ask, just nodded. "I'll read it later." "Okay," Emily said, turning to leave. "Emily," Helen called after her, "stay with me for a bit." They sat together. No need for words. On the table, tea, cookies, and a vase of fresh tulips. "You know," Helen said quietly, "sometimes I think I'm lucky." "Lucky?" Emily asked. "Yes, because I have a daughter-in-law who knows how to write." Both women laughed, and just like that, Emily's tears began to fall. That evening, when David came home, he found them sitting side by side. He didn't ask anything, just smiled. Inside, he felt something vast and calm. The kind of peace you feel when standing before the ocean, hearing the waves settle after a storm. He knew that letter might never be read aloud, but it had already done its work. It closed one chapter and opened another, one of understanding. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She went out to the porch and sat beside the tulips. The moonlight washed everything in silver. The air smelled of tea and soil. She opened her phone and typed a quick note, not to post, just to keep. "I used to think I had to run fast so no one would leave me behind. But now I know. Someone was always behind me, waiting, even when I lost my way." That someone was Mom. She saved it, looked up at the sky and saw a shooting star flash across the horizon. In that moment, her heart felt light. No guilt, no fear, only gratitude. The next morning, Helen read the letter. She didn't cry, already delivered them. There are cracks that once seemed impossible to heal, but time, kindness, and patience have sealed them with the strongest glue of all. Love. If there's a mother-in-law, a daughter-in-law, or simply someone in your family you've drifted away from, write them a letter, even if you never send it, because the miracle isn't in them reading it, it's in you opening your heart. And, as always, New Golden Day ends softly. If this story warmed your heart, share it with someone you love. Leave a comment and tell us, is there a mother in your life who taught you what love really means? And don't forget to subscribe to New Golden Day, where every day we learn to live a little slower, love a little deeper, and give thanks for the ones who are still here with us. The last night of spring, David sat alone on the porch, listening to the wind brushing through the dried tulip stems. Moonlight spread a thin silver glow across the wooden floor, still and quiet, like the slow breathing of a house at peace. Inside, his mother and Emily were talking, their voices soft and mingling, probably about a recipe or a new dessert idea. Their laughter drifted out in gentle bursts, blending together as if there had never been days of silence between them. David sat there, fingers intertwined, eyes gazing into the distance. He remembered the years before, when he thought all it took to keep a family happy was hard work and money. He hadn't realized that what keeps a home warm isn't wealth, but attention, given at the right moment. He used to believe that the tension between his mother and his wife was a women's matter, something he shouldn't interfere in. He stayed quiet, convinced that time would fix it on its own. But he had been wrong, because silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's escape. And when a man stays silent too long, the two women he loves most begin to drift apart, each withdrawing into her own quiet world of unspoken hurt. He remembered the nights he came home late to find his mother sitting at the table, the kitchen light still on, the food already cold. She would smile and say, "I'm not hungry yet." He remembered the mornings when Emily left early, her lips pressed tight, skipping a "good morning" to avoid saying something that might sting. All those little moments, every glance, every breath, had woven an invisible distance, one he hadn't been sensitive enough to see. He took a sip of cold tea and smiled faintly. Now he understood. Being a man isn't just about earning or protecting. It's about creating a space where the people you love feel safe enough to show their hearts. The day he stood between his mother and his wife in that kitchen, when everything seemed ready to fall apart, he finally realized how long his mother had been lonely. The woman who had lived her whole life for him had learned to walk softly, speak quietly, and make herself small inside the home she had once built. He remembered her words, "No one has the right to make me feel like a burden." That sentence had struck him like a bell in his chest, because deep down, he knew. He had once made her still time to make it right, still time to say, "I'm sorry." He looked at his shadow stretched across the porch. The moonlight lay over his shoulders like a quiet reminder of time passing. His mother was aging. Emily was changing too, no longer the hurried woman she once was. All three of them were learning how to be together again. Slower, gentler, deeper. He now understood that family isn't a place to win or lose. It's where you learn to lose a little, to keep love from leaving. He remembered his mother once telling him about his father, the man David had always seen as strength itself. "One time," she had said, "we argued over something silly. He didn't argue back. He just poured me a cup of tea. I asked, 'Aren't you angry?' He smiled and said, 'Getting angry is easy. Staying together is hard.' Now David understood. Real love isn't found in victory, but in choosing gentleness again and again. He stood up and walked slowly into the garden. The air was cool but kind. Tiny buds had started to sprout, proof that life always finds its way back, no matter how harsh the winter. He bent down, touching one fragile bloom, thinking of his mother. Those hands had once guided him across the street, soothed his fever, and traced his first letters in a worn notebook. And he thought, perhaps there's nothing softer in this world than a mother's hands. The porch light came on behind him. Emily appeared wrapped in a light sweater. "You're still awake?" she asked. He smiled. "Just thinking. About Mum." "So was I," she said softly. They looked at each other, no words needed. Everything was already understood in the way they stood side by side, both facing the same warm house where an elderly woman was still awake, reading under the golden light. David walked inside. His mother was in her chair, holding a notebook. "What are you reading, Mum?" he asked. "Emily's letter," she said, smiling. "My daughter-in-law writes beautifully." He looked at her, seeing the quiet pride glowing in her eyes. "You know," she said, "people aren't born knowing how to love. We all have to learn. Me, Emily, even you. We're all still learning to love better." David nodded, his throat tightening. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, "for teaching me." Through silence, she squeezed his hand. "No, son, I taught you through faith." In that moment, he understood. The greatest strength in life isn't control, it's trust. Trust that people can change. Trust that love can heal. And trust that no matter the distance, as long as someone still wants to come home, a family is never lost. The next morning, David wrote down everything, a simple note left on his desk. He didn't plan to post it online or share it, but as he wrote, the weight inside him lifted, like a burden finally set down. "I once thought I was strong because I knew how to stay silent. Now I see, silence isn't strength. It's the space where sorrow grows. A family doesn't need heroes. It needs people willing to sit down and listen. If you're a man, ask your mother today if she's doing okay. Hold your wife's hand when she's tired. Sometimes, what people need isn't an answer, just your presence." He set down the pen and read the last line. His heart felt still, peaceful. From the living room came the sound of laughter, his mother and Emily laughing together. For the first time in years, the house didn't just feel like a place to live. It felt like home. And then, the narrator's warm voice closed the story. Maybe happiness in a family isn't about who's right or wrong, but about who's willing to stay and make things right together. A mother teaches us compassion, a daughter-in-law teaches us growth, and a son reminds us that, in every relationship, listening is the greatest act of love. In the end, we will all grow old, but if, in your home, there's still laughter,